My brother stole my inheritance, thinking he could get away with it because I was the younger, quieter sibling. Growing up, it was always just the two of us, me and my older brother James. Our parents weren't wealthy, but they worked hard to give us a decent life. My dad ran a small landscaping business, and my mom was a school teacher. They taught us the value of hard work, honesty, and family loyalty. But I guess James never really absorbed those lessons the way I did. When our dad passed away unexpectedly a few years ago, it was a devastating blow. I was still in college at the time, trying to figure out my future. James, on the other hand, was already married and had a steady job in real estate. He always seemed to have everything under control, always knew what he wanted and how to get it. But looking back, I realize now that he was always looking out for number one, himself. After Dad's funeral, when things settled down a bit, Mom sat us down to talk about the will. Dad had left behind the house, some savings, and his business. Nothing extravagant, but enough to give us both a good start. The plan was for the house and the savings to be split evenly between James and me, and I would get the business. I had always helped Dad with it during the summers, and he knew I had a knack for it. It was something we bonded over, and I'd always dreamed of running it one day. The day Mom pulled out the will, James seemed unusually calm, almost too calm. He sat in our parents' old living room, legs crossed, wearing a faint smile, as if he already knew how this conversation would go. I remember the way he watched me, his eyes narrowing whenever I spoke, like he was sizing me up. I was still reeling from grief, barely able to focus, but James? He was already planning his next move. "Listen, Alex," James said after Mom had read the will. "I think we need to be practical about this. You're still in college, you don't have the experience to run a business, and Mom, she can't manage things on her own. The business, the house, it's too much. Let me take care of things, at least for now. I'll handle the business, make sure it doesn't go under. You can focus on your studies, and when you're ready, we can talk about this again." His words were smooth, almost rehearsed. I wanted to protest, but my mind was clouded with sorrow, and I couldn't think straight. Mom looked at me with concern, her eyes red from crying. "Maybe James is right, Alex. Just for now," she said softly. "Let him handle the business, and you can focus on school. Your dad would have wanted you to finish your education." I didn't argue. I was too tired, too heartbroken to fight. I nodded, trying to convince myself that James was looking out for the family. He had always been the responsible one, the one who seemed to have it all together. I trusted him, and that was my first mistake. Months passed, and I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the loss. But something was nagging at me. Whenever I called James to ask about the business or the house, he'd brush me off with vague answers. "Everything's fine, Alex. Don't worry about it," he'd say. "You have enough on your plate." One day, while I was home for the weekend, I decided to stop by Dad's office. The old place had a comforting smell, freshly cut grass, earth, and the faint scent of gasoline from the lawnmowers. I hadn't been there in months, and walking through the door felt like stepping into a memory. I half expected to see Dad at his desk, scribbling notes or talking on the phone. Instead, the office was empty, papers strewn across the desk, and Dad's old leather chair was covered in dust. Something wasn't right. I spent the next few hours going through files, trying to get a sense of the business. The more I looked, the more concerned I became. Contracts had been canceled, clients lost, and the bank statements showed a steady withdrawal of funds. Equipment had been sold off, and the account balance was alarmingly low. Panic set in. What was James doing? That night, I confronted James at his home. He lived in a nice suburban neighborhood with his wife, Sarah, who was always polite but distant. James opened the door, surprised to see me. "Alex, what are you doing here?" he asked, his smile faltering. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch watching TV. She looked up, sensing the tension. I'll just give you two some space, she mumbled, quickly leaving the room. James turned to me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. What's this about, Alex? It's about the business, James, I said, my voice rising. I went to Dad's office today. The accounts are almost empty, the equipment is gone, and half the clients have left. What the hell is going on? James sighed, running a hand through his hair. I told you, Alex. The business wasn't doing well. The equipment was outdated. The clients were moving on. I did what I had to do to keep things afloat. By selling everything off, by draining the accounts, I shot back. This isn't what Dad wanted. He left the business to me. James's eyes darkened. Dad left it to you, but you're not ready. You wouldn't know the first thing about running a business. I'm protecting our family, making sure Mom is taken care of. If that means making tough decisions, so be it. I felt a lump in my throat, anger boiling inside me. You're not protecting anyone but yourself, I said quietly. I want my share, James. I want what Dad left for me. James laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your share? There's nothing left, Alex. The money's gone. The business is done. Move on. Finish school, get a real job, and stop living in a fantasy. He walked away, leaving me standing alone in his living room. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. James had always been the golden child, the one everyone trusted. I had no idea how to fight back, no resources, no plan. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Over the next few weeks, I started digging deeper. I visited the old clients, asking why they had left. Most of them were sympathetic but said James had told them the business was shutting down. A few mentioned seeing James with another landscaping company, one of our competitors. The pieces were starting to come together. I went to the bank and requested copies of the transactions. At first, they were reluctant to give me anything, but when I mentioned the possibility of legal action, they handed over the statements. My heart sank as I went through them. James had been transferring money from Dad's business account to his personal account for months. He had been using the business as his own personal piggy bank. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to visit Dad's lawyer, Mr. Thompson. He had been a family friend for years and had handled all of Dad's legal affairs. When I walked into his office, he looked surprised to see me. Alex, what brings you here? He asked. I explained everything, how James had taken over the business, sold the equipment, and drained the accounts. I showed him the bank statements, the canceled contracts, and the copy of Dad's will I had found. Mr. Thompson listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. This is troubling, Alex, he said finally. Your father's will clearly states that the business was to be left to you. James had no right to do any of this without your consent. We need to take action. He explained that we could file a lawsuit against James for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of funds. He also suggested we freeze the remaining assets to prevent James from taking anything else. It was going to be a long, difficult battle, but I felt a sense of hope for the first time in months. We filed the lawsuit, and as expected, James was furious. He called me, yelling over the phone, accusing me of betraying the family, of being greedy. You're making a huge mistake, Alex, he shouted. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I know exactly what I'm doing, I replied calmly. I'm taking back what's mine. The legal battle was grueling. James hired a high-powered lawyer, someone who was known for being ruthless. They tried to discredit me, digging into my personal life, looking for anything they could use against me. But I had nothing to hide. I was determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. The court hearings dragged on for months. Each time I sat in that courtroom, I felt like I was reliving the pain of losing Dad all over again. But I refused to back down. With Mr. Thompson by my side, we presented the evidence: Dad's will, the bank statements, the testimony from former clients. We even had Sarah testify, reluctantly admitting that James had been using the business funds for personal expenses. James's lawyer tried to argue that he was just doing what was best for the family, that I was too young and inexperienced to handle the business. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge saw through James's lies and manipulation. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded control of the business, my share of the house, and a substantial portion of the money James had taken. It was a victory, but it felt bittersweet. My relationship with James was shattered, and I knew it would never be the same. As if that wasn't enough during the trial, we uncovered more than just the truth about the will. We discovered that James had been embezzling money from the business, laundering funds through his real estate deals. The news hit our community hard. James had been a respected figure, a trusted real estate agent, and now he was exposed as a fraud. With his reputation destroyed and his assets seized, James had nowhere to turn. His wife left him, taking their kids and filing for divorce. He lost his job, his friends, and the respect of everyone who knew him. It was a harsh fall from grace, but one that he had brought upon himself. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding the business. It wasn't easy, but with the support of my mother and some of Dad's old clients who had heard what happened, I managed to turn things around. I rebranded, modernized the equipment, and started building a loyal customer base. It wasn't long before the business was thriving again, just as Dad would have wanted. Looking back, I realized that this experience taught me more than just how to run a business. It taught me the importance of standing up for myself, of fighting for what's right, even when the odds are against you. It taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about trust, respect, and integrity. And most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. But that betrayal doesn't define who we are. Our choices, our actions, and our resilience define us. James eventually moved away, leaving behind a trail of debts and broken relationships. I haven't heard from him in years, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I've made peace with what happened, and I've built a life that I'm proud of. The business continues to grow, and every day I strive to honor my father's legacy. I've learned to forgive, not for James, but for myself, so I can move forward without the weight of bitterness. In the end, justice was served, and I came out stronger. I may not have chosen this battle, but I fought it, and I won. And that victory is something that no one can ever take away from me.